Widely admired for his transatlantic flight, Charles Lindbergh drew criticism for opposing America's entry into World War II. In this episode of American Dissidents, we tell the story of the aviator's principled mission to defend America first. As unthinkable as it is today, Americans in large numbers opposed U.S. entry into World War II. 80% were against declaring war, according to polls taken before the attack on Pearl Harbor. Two opposing camps clashed in the Great Debate: pro-war interventionists and non-interventionists, often disparaged as isolationists. The most popular group on the non-interventionist side, the America First Committee, used pamphlets, radio broadcasts, letter-writing campaigns, and public rallies to get the word out. The committee formed at Yale University but drew most of its support from the Midwest in the orbit of Chicago. Its message appealed to the hinterlands folks who disliked what they perceived as East Coast elitism. Many had seen their sons killed or maimed in the First War. Some believed that a British victory over Germany was not worth the sacrifice America would have to make, and would put the survival of the American system at risk. They wanted their country kept out of the fighting. Charles Lindbergh waged an independent campaign for non-intervention. He wrote articles in national magazines, gave radio addresses broadcast nationally, and spoke at public gatherings. He even testified before Congress in opposition to the Lend-Lease Act. Lindbergh joined the America First Committee in April 1940 and quickly became the committee's most popular speaker by far, but with him came controversy. In the years before the war, Lindbergh inspected the aviation facilities of Britain, France, and Third Reich Germany, which he especially admired for its people's spirit and the country's technical innovations. On Lindbergh's third visit to Germany, No. 2 leader Hermann Göring awarded him a medal for his achievements in aviation. Lindbergh's enemies seized on this to impugn his loyalty. Attacks on Lindbergh peaked after a speech he gave in Iowa entitled, "Who Are the War Agitators?" In it, Lindbergh named the British, the Jewish, and the Roosevelt administration as the three groups most actively pushing the country toward war. Roosevelt's attack dogs went to work, especially Secretary of the Interior Harold Ickes and Assistant Secretary of State Adolf Berle. Lindbergh was predictably condemned for anti-Semitism, but defended his remarks, saying that he did not speak out of hate for any individuals or any people. Lindbergh increasingly became a liability to America First, as the attacks against him and the organization drowned out the message of non-interventionism. What was Lindbergh's rationale? In his quest for an independent destiny for America, Lindbergh quoted George Washington's farewell address, which warned against making hazardous alliances with other nations. Lindbergh wanted his country kept out of what he called the eternal wars in Europe. He did not see the war as a struggle to preserve democracy, but as a conflict over material wealth and the control over a continent. He saw the war as an internal conflict among members of European civilization, one which risked its total destruction. And in that scenario, it was better for America to stay out in order to preserve what remained. He urged the building up of America's defenses rather than spending its resources on foreign conflicts. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Though it urged its members to support the new war against Japan, America First issued a statement. Our principles were right. Had they been followed, war could have been avoided. The America First Committee was dissolved. Lindbergh offered to serve the war effort as a pilot. The Roosevelt administration refused him. Instead, he went to work for an old friend, Henry Ford, who was ramping up the production of military planes. While testing American fighter planes, he shot down a Japanese plane. He devoted his energy and expertise to the war effort, though he never recanted his non-interventionist stand. His energetic and personal mission to keep America out of foreign wars are what make Charles Lindbergh an American dissident. Sincere thanks to all our new subscribers and viewers. We humbly ask that you give a thumbs up and share this, and that you please subscribe to keep high-quality content coming your way. Now back to the video. One of the most memorable faces of the silent film era took a detour into non-interventionist activism in the months prior to America's entry into World War II. In this episode of American Dissidents, we profile the actress Lillian Gish, and her time with the America First Committee. Lillian Gish and her younger sister Dorothy began acting in films in 1912. Their careers took off after landing roles in movies directed by D.W. Griffith, who directed Birth of a Nation. It was under Griffith's leadership that Lillian traveled to France during World War I to make a propaganda film. There she witnessed the horrors of war firsthand and became a pacifist. She later regretted the part she played in portraying the Germans as monsters during that war. When not acting on the screen, Lillian performed on stage. In 1939, she landed a role in the Chicago production of Life with Father, which ran for a record-breaking 66 weeks. Her pacifist leanings put her in distinguished company as Chicago was the epicenter of the America First Committee. For example, she became friends with Colonel Robert McCormick, publisher of the anti-interventionist Chicago Tribune. She gave a non-interventionist speech on network radio in April 1941 that was praised by her friend, well-known journalist H.L. Mencken. She later appeared with fellow America Firster Charles Lindbergh before a capacity crowd at the Hollywood Bowl. Realizing her non-interventionist stance was not endearing her to the Hollywood studios, Gish resigned from the America First Committee in September 1941. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th, and America First dissolved a few days later. Lillian could no longer find work in Hollywood after the war began. She blamed her previous association with America First and looked for a role that would redeem her to the studios. After some months, an actress friend took her to the office of Louis B. Mayer, asking him for a role for Lillian. He turned Lillian down. Later, she landed a small role in an Allied war propaganda film, Commandos Strike at Dawn. The film did not succeed, and Lillian's career remained stagnant, finally resurging some years later. While not as dedicated as Lindbergh, Nye and Wheeler, Lillian Gish deserves credit for her stint with America First and is on our list of American dissidents. Sincere thanks to all our new subscribers and viewers. We humbly ask that you give a thumbs up and share this, and that you please subscribe to keep high-quality content coming your way. Now back to the video. Of the celebrities who opposed America's entry into World War II, Charles Lindbergh is by far the best remembered. But many other prominent Americans voiced their opposition. In this episode of American Dissidents, we profile the America First Senator from Montana, Burton K. Wheeler. We interrupt to ask you to please subscribe, like, and share this so we can keep bringing you scintillating historical and biographical material. Now back to the video. Wheeler grew up in Boston but earned his law degree from the University of Michigan and relocated to the legendary mining town of Butte, Montana. There he became known as a champion of the people's interests, winning the approval of farmers, miners, and railroad laborers. As the U.S. Attorney for Montana, Wheeler took on the Anaconda Company, a powerhouse in Montana state politics. In 1922, he was elected to the U.S. Senate on the Democratic ticket. Upon taking office, he gained membership in the Interstate Commerce Committee. His devotion to the working class caught the attention of Robert La Follette. This progressive Wisconsin senator chose Wheeler as his running mate during his unsuccessful campaign for the presidency in 1924. When Franklin D. Roosevelt ran for president in 1932, Wheeler staunchly supported him. He withdrew his support when FDR proposed to pack the Supreme Court. The rift grew as Wheeler became the leading senator battling Roosevelt's efforts to enter the U.S. into the Second World War. He strongly supported the neutrality legislation of the mid-1930s and opposed the Selective Service Act that would implement a draft during peacetime. He bitterly opposed the Lend-Lease Act that would provide increased U.S. aid to Great Britain. In 1941, Senator Gerald P. Nye proposed an investigation into war propaganda in motion pictures. The resolution went to Senator Wheeler's committee. To investigate, he formed a subcommittee and staffed it almost completely with his fellow non-interventionist senators. Unfortunately, Nye and other senators on the committee appeared ill-prepared at times, admitting that they had not seen many of the motion pictures they claimed as war propaganda. The Hollywood studios were represented by Wendell Willkie, Republican presidential candidate in 1940. Willkie, a skilled lawyer, used his testimony to impugn the motives of Wheeler and Nye, smearing the entire investigating committee and scoring a win for the interventionist side. In the end, the committee adjourned earlier than scheduled and never resumed. Wheeler gave speeches at rallies of the America First Committee, occasionally sharing the stage with Charles Lindbergh. After Pearl Harbor was attacked, the senator, along with Lindbergh, gave his support and his Senate vote to the war on Japan, but never repudiated his non-interventionist stand. His anti-war principles likely led to his defeat in the Senate primary in 1946, after which he never again held political office. As a powerful non-interventionist voice in the U.S. Senate and at America First rallies, Burton K. Wheeler is an American dissident. Sincere thanks to all our new subscribers and viewers. We humbly ask that you give a thumbs up and share this, and that you please subscribe to keep high-quality content coming your way. Now back to the video. As surprising as it may sound today, many prominent Americans opposed their country's entry into World War II. In this edition of American Dissidents, we feature U.S. Senator Gerald P. Nye, who not only opposed the war, but investigated the munitions industry and the Hollywood war propagandists. We interrupt to ask you to please subscribe, like, and share this so we can keep bringing you scintillating historical and biographical material. Now back to the video. He grew up in Wisconsin. Nye never attended college, but that didn't stop him from becoming a newspaper editor at 18. His first paper failed, but he didn't quit. He moved on to another newspaper in Iowa, where he was known to write between 2 and 4 editorials for each edition. It was his move to North Dakota, though, that began his rise to national politics. This windswept prairie state had a population that was roughly 90% rural. Promoting the interest of farmers became a passion of Nye's. He joined the Nonpartisan League, which rallied to defend farmers against the forces of big business, the railroads, and high finance. His ties to the League helped him gain appointment to a U.S. Senate seat after the sitting North Dakota senator died. He was 33 years old, the second youngest in the Senate, when he took office in Washington. The first time in his life he had traveled east of Chicago. Throughout his 19 years in the Senate, Nye represented the prominent farm constituency of his home state. He battled special interests, railing against the money power and international bankers. He condemned the Federal Reserve as a tool of private bankers who used their control over American money and credit to their own selfish ends. In 1934, he became chairman of a Senate committee that investigated the munitions industry. This put the young senator's anti-war stance in the national spotlight. His opinion was that the extreme profitableness of the weapons industry jeopardized peace in the world. He favored nationalizing the war industries. His committee found an egregious level of cooperation between the federal government and the munitions industries that effectively promoted war. A powerful orator who kept to his anti-war principles, Nye later helped draft the Neutrality Acts and opposed the legislation aimed at drafting young men into the armed forces. But Nye stirred even greater controversy in 1941 when he proposed a Senate investigation of the radio and movie industries, which he believed were mobilizing an unwitting public to go to war. Nye gave a radio speech in St. Louis listing the executives of all the major Hollywood studios, which he called, quote, the most gigantic engines of propaganda in existence to rouse the war fever in America and plunge this nation to her destruction. Even before Charles Lindbergh joined up, Gerald Nye was a featured speaker at dozens of rallies put on by the America First Committee, the most prominent organization that opposed America's entry into World War II. On the day of the Pearl Harbor attack, Gerald Nye was giving a speech at an America First event. Word of the attack leaked, but the organizers thought it might be a hoax. Nye gave most of his speech but announced the attack at the end. Nye cast his Senate vote for declaring war against Japan and later Germany. Like Lindbergh, he urged support for the U.S. war effort, but never regretted his non-interventionist stance. He lost his Senate seat in 1944 and never won elective office again. His tireless campaign to keep America out of a foreign war and his investigations into the munitions industry and the Hollywood propaganda machine make Gerald P. Nye an American dissident. Sincere thanks to all our new subscribers and viewers. We humbly ask that you give a thumbs up and share this, and that you please subscribe to keep high-quality content coming your way. Now back to the video. Charles Lindbergh Sr. faded into the shadows behind his record-shattering aviator son, but the patriarch led a fascinating life of his own. In this episode of American Dissidents, we uncover the early life and the iconoclastic career of the battling Congressman Charles Lindbergh of Minnesota. Lindbergh, age 1, emigrated with his family from Sweden in 1859. His father chose to settle in a frontier area of Minnesota, so untamed that the threat of attack by Indians was a constant fear. Young Charles grew up hunting in the vast woods and fishing in the rivers and lakes. He developed an appreciation for the land and water that he'd one day pass on to his own young son. The family had to clear land of timber for farming. While delivering logs to a mill one day, his father slipped and was caught by the blade. He survived, but lost an arm. Luckily, one of Charles' older stepbrothers moved from Sweden to help with the farming duties. Sadness struck repeatedly. 3 of his siblings died at young ages. Formal schooling was hard to come by, but Charles learned a lot at home and later entered a local preparatory school at age 20. He enrolled at the University of Michigan and studied law. After graduation, he passed the Minnesota bar and began practicing law in the town of Little Falls, near the family homestead. Lindbergh would soon turn to politics, although he first became active in business and real estate, helping to develop the town of Little Falls. He married, but sadness struck again as his first wife died at age 29, leaving 2 daughters. He married a young teacher who bore his son, Charles Jr. Family troubles emerged again when a fire destroyed the family home. He nonetheless prospered with a solid law practice and real estate development. In 1906, he won the election for the United States Congress from central Minnesota's 6th District. Nominally a Republican, Lindbergh shared much of the thinking of populist movements at the time, especially those that supported the interests of farmers. The day he assumed office in Washington, Lindbergh had his son next to him on the floor of Congress. Lindbergh was well versed in monetary policy and finance. He went on to become one of the most outspoken opponents of the Aldrich Bill, the bill that proposed the new Federal Reserve System. Lindbergh spoke out often against the railroads and other conglomerated financial interests. He referred to these in the title of his book, Banking and Currency and the Money Trust. These special interests conspired to fleece the working men and rig the system in their own privileged favor, according to Lindbergh. Wealth in America was concentrated in too few hands. He introduced a bill to investigate the money trust, which he thought deliberately caused recessions and money panics to further boost its own position. Fitting to his thesis, the bill never made it out of committee. As the Aldrich plan for an American central bank circulated around the House, Lindbergh saw it as the fulfillment of the money trust's ultimate plan. He argued that instead of being a federal institution, the central bank would be in private hands due to the fact that large banks would own stock in the central bank. This would mean that the central bank would serve the interests of the big bankers. Since the central bank would issue money, Lindbergh opposed this, saying that only the government should have the right to issue money. In the end, the Federal Reserve System became law, but Lindbergh was not done fighting. When the World War came around, he again voiced opposition. Similar to his money trust rhetoric, Lindbergh blamed invisible organizers and so-called special interests who stood to gain millions in profit. He introduced bills opposing America's entry, but the sinking of the Lusitania and other vessels tilted the public's favor toward the war. In April 1917, America entered the war, and Lindbergh's principles dictated that he now give it his support. Historical synchronicity shows in Charles Jr.'s outspoken campaign against America's entry into a world war a generation later. Lindbergh lost his congressional seat in 1916 and never again won an election, despite running for U.S. Senate, the U.S. House again, and for governor of Minnesota. He developed a brain tumor and died in 1924, 3 years before Charles Jr. made his record-setting flight across the Atlantic. In rising from his humble frontier origin to eloquently oppose the war, special interest power, and the money trust, Charles Lindbergh Sr. is indefatigably an American dissident. This Kennedy patriarch is known as the famous father of JFK and RFK. He built a fortune in banking, stock trading, and as a Hollywood studio head. As FDR's ambassador to Britain, his doubts about the war brought him into conflict with leaders of that country and with the administration. Here we discuss the non-interventionist battle of Joseph P. Kennedy. Sincere thanks to all our new subscribers and viewers. We humbly ask that you give a thumbs up and share this, and that you please subscribe to keep high-quality content coming your way. Now back to the video. When he assumed the ambassadorship in 1937, he quickly found favor with the British press. He was already famous, and it didn't hurt having 9 photogenic children. As Kennedy began to speak out about the possibility of war, he fell out of favor with the British just as quickly. In his plain-spoken Boston manner, he told the press that the average American is, quote, more interested in how he's going to eat and whether his insurance is good than in foreign politics. Along that same line, he mentioned to Lord Halifax, quote, the isolationist tendencies at home. Kennedy was right. Prior to Pearl Harbor, polls showed that up to 80% of the American public opposed their country's entry into a new war in Europe. Echoing George Washington's farewell address, in March 1938, Kennedy told the Duke of Kent and other members of British high society that Americans were, quote, appalled by the prospect of war, and that the great majority were against entering any entangling alliances. He wanted the British to know that America's entry into a war was not a foregone conclusion. With Germany's annexation of Austria, war tensions escalated. Kennedy continued to ignite controversy with his friendship with Lady Astor, who had complained to a New York Times reporter of, quote, the anti-German propaganda in the United States. She added that the, quote, agitators against Germany were forgetting completely the atrocities going on in other nations, in Russia, in Spain, and Ethiopia. She invited Kennedy to a lunch at Cliveden, the Astor's country estate. In attendance was Charles Lindbergh, the heroic aviator who bitterly opposed America's entry into any new war. Kennedy later asked Lindbergh to write a report outlining what would happen in Britain if war began. In it, Lindbergh stressed the devastating power of Germany's air force, arguing that France and Britain are, quote, too weak to defend themselves. Lindbergh had previously inspected the air power of France, Britain, and Germany, and was speaking from first-hand knowledge. He advised the British to, quote, avoid war now at almost any cost. Kennedy dared to suggest in an October 1938 speech on Trafalgar Day that, quote, democratic and dictator countries, unquote, should try to work through their differences since, quote, we have to live together in the same world whether we like it or not. This infuriated his bosses back in Washington, prompting Secretary of State Cordell Hull to urge that Kennedy, in his speech, did not speak for the administration. FDR himself gave a broadcast speech that repudiated what Ambassador Kennedy had said only days earlier. Kennedy's plain-spoken anti-interventionism continued to outrage his British hosts and the Roosevelt administration, who plotted to minimize his role. Even after Britain declared war on Germany on September 1, 1939, Kennedy, in a private telegram to the president, asked Roosevelt to step in and stop it. He urged the president to try and deal directly with Hitler, and that, quote, having been a practical person all my life, I am of the opinion it is quite conceivable that President Roosevelt can maneuver himself into a position where he can save the world. It's no surprise that Roosevelt rejected the idea out of hand, calling Kennedy's plea, quote, the silliest message to me I have ever received. Equally unsurprising was Kennedy's resignation as ambassador, which came less than 2 months after the beginning of the war. He agreed to stay in the role until FDR found a replacement, but he sailed back to the United States. Despite his resignation, Kennedy pledged to help the president keep the U.S. out of the war. The America First Committee wanted him as chairman. Former President Herbert Hoover asked him to sign an anti-intervention statement with other notables. He declined both, saying he preferred to wage his own independent battle to keep the country from war. But what was his reasoning for opposing America's entry? There's no doubt that he feared for the lives of his 2 sons in the military. He's quoted as saying, I hate to think how much money I would give up rather than sacrifice Joe and Jack in a war. Critics said it was because he had made his fortune and didn't want to see it threatened. But a study of his quotations reveals other concerns. For America to go to war to defend Britain's colonial possessions didn't sit well with him. Kennedy thought the war might end the free market capitalist system in which he'd made his fortune, and that a totalitarian fascist-style government might have to be implemented in order for America to wage and win the war. In other words, the price might be too high, and the American way of life might have to be sacrificed. It's easy with the benefit of hindsight to dismiss Kennedy's concerns, but before June 1941, It was not obvious that the Soviet Union would enter the war on the side of the Allies. In fact, the USSR and Germany had a non-aggression pact and divided Poland between them. If the USSR had not fought and defeated the invading Germans on its territory, weakening Germany as a whole, then it's conceivable that a full-strength German onslaught might have defeated Britain and France. Under that scenario, Lindbergh's assessment of the situation might have proven accurate. In one of his last anti-interventionist speeches before retiring to private life, Kennedy said, "If I am called appeaser because I oppose the entry of this country into the present war, I cheerfully plead guilty. So must every one of you who want to keep America out of war."